Ladies and gentlemen, this evening we begin our discussion and analysis of the objectivist ethics. The objectivist ethics is, of course, the branch of objectivism which has been presented in greatest detail in print in Miss Rand's novels and essays. Nonetheless, there are many crucial issues in the objectivist ethics which I shall discuss in somewhat more detail and from a variety of different aspects than was given in Miss Rand's work. I said in lecture 1 of this course that the three basic branches of philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, may be summarized by three questions. What exists? How do you know? And so what? Well, it is from this point on in our lectures that I shall be concerned with the so what. In different ways, that question will concern us in all subsequent lectures, not only in the discussion of ethics, but in the discussion of politics, of art, and in all the remaining subjects to be covered in this course. Let us begin by defining what is the branch of philosophy called ethics or morality. Let me mention parenthetically that while sometimes a very slight distinction is made between ethics and morality in their meaning, I use the two terms interchangeably because I don't see any validity or justification whatsoever in the type of distinctions which are sometimes made between these two terms. Ethics is a code of values to guide man's choices and actions. The choices and actions that determine the purpose and the course of his life. Ethics is a code of values to guide man's choices and actions, the choices and actions that determine the purpose and the course of his life. Therefore, the task of the science of ethics, of course, is to discover and define in what a rational code of ethics would consist. And in philosophy, one of the most formidable problems which philosophical systems have been broken over is the task of providing a rational foundation for the particular moral values a given school of philosophical thought espoused. Now, as many of you know, traditionally, a great many moralists, and this view is rampant among 20th century philosophers, have held that a rational code of ethics is impossible in the very nature of things, that there is no way to justify in reason the superiority or the claim to the superiority of one code of values over another, that in the last analysis all matters of ethics reflect personal choices, personal preferences, which are arbitrary, which are matters of faith and feeling. This, as I say, is certainly the dominant view held among 20th century philosophers, certainly by, for example, the advocates of logical positivism or logical empiricism, as it's sometimes called. Differences in moral values, modern philosophers for the most part claim, merely reflect differences in taste. We may personally find murder or the slaughter, the wholesale slaughter of a nation abhorrent, but one cannot prove in reason that this is wrong. In what manner have they been answered by other schools of ethics? Well, in one sense, they have been answered in large measure with substantial agreement. That is, by the agreement of all those avowed mystical philosophers who concede that a rational code of morality is indeed impossible and claim that the justification of their particular code of values rests in the fact that it expresses the voice and the will of God or of some supernatural being who has made his beliefs and wishes in this matter known to them via revelation, mystical intuition, and which they cling to not on the grounds of reason, but rather on the grounds of faith. Indeed, most ethical systems that have dominated cultures throughout history have been openly mystical and have sought to justify themselves, except that the term justification isn't applicable in this context, by an appeal to supernatural authority and to mystical revelation. Still another approach to the problem of ethics have been those moral philosophers who, while sometimes claiming that a rational science of ethics is indeed possible, came up with an answer which did not satisfy the requirements of science or reason at all. They said, in effect, that the fundamental principles of moral right or wrong are self-evident, that they are not proven or derived, but they are in effect like axioms, which every man inescapably must recognize or must know. They are self-evident. They are known by direct intuition or by direct appeals to conscience or by direct appeals to heaven knows what. And while this type of argument is sometimes classified as an attempt to justify ethics on rational grounds, in fact, such a classification is wrong, is unjustified, because no moral philosopher has ever succeeded in demonstrating that any particular moral preference of his is right self-evidently. Now, sometimes the principles which these philosophers have advocated might be right or right in some respects, but they are not right self-evidently. For example, one philosopher, and perhaps more than one, might say that it's self-evident that, quote, all unnecessary pain is evil, close quote. That is certainly a sentiment with which we would all be inclined to agree, except, of course, how do you define what is or is not necessary, and why is all unnecessary pain evil? There is an answer, but it's not self-evident. It's not something which we know by revelation or by direct intuition. It can be proven, but it needs to be proven. But here is the fascinating thing about the science of ethics, or the subject of ethics, that while there have been a great diversity of disagreements among philosophers and mystical theologians and ethicists about how they justify their particular ethical creeds, or how ethics in general is to be justified, there have been remarkable points of similarity, of basic agreement about the content of the different ethical systems that have dominated world history. In other words, while they often differed on how they arrived at their conclusions, there is a remarkable degree of agreement with regard to those conclusions. The essential point of agreement hangs, of course, as I would assume you know, upon the sacrosanct nobility of the concept of self-sacrifice. Throughout history, every ethical system which has ever been a major cultural influence has taught one variety or another of the doctrine of self-sacrifice. That is, has taught that man has no right to exist for his own sake,